Buyurun başkanım, söz sizde.
Çok teşekkürler. Merhaba, hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Burada olmak çok gurur verici gerçekten. Ülkemizin 2053 yol haritası için önemli bir etkinlik olacağına inanıyoruz. Konuşmamı bundan sonrasında İngilizce devam edeceğim izninizle. With your permission, I will continue in English. Our second session is the Green Deal roadmap of EU countries. As you know, EU has adopted European Green Deal in 2020. And the main objective of this deal is a carbon neutral Europe in 2050. And following this main deal and also following the announcements of other countries, many countries in the world have announced their net zero emission goals for 2050 or 2060 and also for 2070 sometimes. And in this regard, we have also announced our 2053 objective. In this regard, this session is very important in order to be able to share the objectives or the policies of EU countries with the valuable contributions of our guests. I will not make it much longer. And in this session, our first speaker is Mr. Christian Ruby, the Secretary General of Eurelectric. Our speakers can give more details about Eurelectric. It is the Federation of European Electricity Industry, including power generation, distribution and supply. And Mr. Ruby will give us information regarding energy security in a changing geopolitical time. As you know, the effects of the pandemic, geopolitical tensions, and also increasing energy prices sometimes all affect these issues, and Mr. Ruby's contribution will also be very valuable in this sense. Mr. Ruby, the floor is yours, and we will also appreciate if you can kindly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merhaba. That's about as much Turkish I can. I should also say to my very good friend, İzzet, teşekkür ederim for the invitation and for the very good cooperation in Eurelectric. We are very happy to have TESAP as part of the Eurelectric family. For everybody who may not have very present what is Eurelectric, we are the trade body of the European electricity industry. It's 3,500 companies in Europe working together to define the opinions, to study important matters of the electricity industry. 5 years ago, we made a commitment to say we want to support the Paris Agreement. We want to lead the energy transition. So we made a vision for the entire industry with all the CEOs signing that the electricity industry wants to become carbon neutral well before mid-century. And why well before mid-century? So that we can help other sectors to decarbonize their energy use. So we can help the transport sector decarbonize, we can help industry decarbonize, and help also other sectors like the buildings to reduce their emissions. I thought I'd say a bit of things about the Green Deal, of course, but importantly also the issue of security of supply, because as you will know, a few things have happened since the Green Deal was agreed. All of a sudden there was a pandemic, and then on top of that we now have the war in Ukraine, which adds perspective to the situation that we're facing, adds challenges, but also adds clarity to the direction of travel and to what we need to do. And it is very closely linked to the whole issue about what is the future of thermal power plants in the short term, in the medium term, and also in the long term. So this situation has changed a lot. I say that the tectonic plates of international relations have changed, and so have our notion of energy. For many years, our notion of security of supply, our notion of secure energy was the energy that we could burn in power plants, burn in our cars, that was readily available and dispatchable. Now this is changing, because all of a sudden this is the energy that is insecure. This is the energy that is expensive. It's the energy we're not in control of, as the minister also said. So this situation, the Green Deal also needs us to revisit our notion of what security of supply means, energy security. We'll wait a bit with that one. Europe has taken a very complacent approach, I would say, to energy issues for many years. Since the Second World War, we have basically taken a very liberal approach, thinking that trading was good, as in many other cases. But as the minister noted this morning, this has also given us a dependency, just as Turkey is experiencing these days. And in Europe, the situation is very bad. 19% of EU coal is from Russia, 36% of all oil, and 40% of our gas. Now that's, is this back? We were always planning to let's say, come out of coal and gas, especially in the electricity sector, but it was for the longer term. Now we're faced with a new reality that forces us to think differently, to accelerate what we had wanted to do and do it significantly faster. What you see on these graphs is 3 scenarios we developed a few years ago where we asked the question, how can we get to net zero? Starting from the left, you have minus 80%, then you have minus 90 in the middle, and the last scenario is a full net zero decarbonization scenario. So you see on the dark, at the bottom, you see the gradual phase out of fossil fuels, and you see the significant rise of renewables on the top of these slides. If we had to draw them today, it would be much more radical. The European Commission is planning on some very, very drastic measures to counteract the brutal war that Russia is waging in Ukraine. You will probably have heard about all the sanctions that the European Union is trying to impose in this context. And we believe that these will be eventually worse, more strict. And we also believe that we will see countermeasures from the Russian regime. We've seen already 3 countries have the tap turned off. Bulgaria, Poland, and now also Finland do not receive energy from Russia anymore. And that forces everybody to think, what is energy security? What do we do in this very challenging situation? Oil and coal, to some extent, there's a world market, but it's getting shorter and more tight. What's really difficult for Europe is the gas, because some countries have no alternatives when it comes to gas. They have no other pipelines, no supply routes other than from Russia. So the question becomes how to replace. And there are essentially 3 words that we should think about in this context. One is diversification, getting it from somewhere else. One is electrification, shifting to electricity. And one is moderation. It's a word that we don't use much in energy. We're used to demand increasing. We're used to having the energy we need. But we need to think very differently this year, this very moment, in fact, and the next 3 to 5 years. If we look from 5 years to 10 years from now, we will see the effects of accelerated deployment of renewables. We will see the effects of accelerated transition of end users to electricity, EVs, heat pumps, all much more efficient. But in the short term, this will not have any effect. So the only thing we can do is really to diversify, get it from somewhere else, and those volumes we can get on the gas side are limited. We can get LNG from our American friends, but it's very limited amounts. That market is not very deep. And then we're left with other diversification measures, such as switching to biogas, switching to hydrogen, but this takes time, probably at least 7 to 10 years. So electrification, first option for the electricity industry, as you can imagine. Diversification, but moderation. Energy savings will be necessary in the short term in a completely different way than we've been used to. That'll require us to think differently about infrastructure, about markets, about generation capacities, and also about the way we protect our customers. As the energy industry, we like to have the markets left alone. We like to be sure that we can trade. But in this situation, we also understand that governments need to do something to protect the most vulnerable customers. For instance, the metal industries in Europe, we see somewhere between 30 and 50% of the electro-intensive metal industries in Europe being mothballed for the moment. They're inactive because of high prices. Is that a good idea in the long term? We need to think about that. We need to do something about it. So, on 18th of May, the European Commission launched a massive plan to counteract this. In blue, you have all the elements that relate one way or the other to gas. In red, you have the electrification measures. And I'll give you just a few figures to understand what we're talking about on the electrification side. Rolling out solar and wind. The European Commission wants to build 600 gigawatts of solar capacity by 2030. We have less than 150 today. So 600, it's enormous. They want to build 60 gigawatts of offshore wind in the North Sea, rising to 300 gigawatts by mid-century. They aim at ramping up the installation of heat pumps with 10 million units between now and 2026. And they're initiating programs to examine the use of gas in industry and see where can we replace gas with electricity. Because many processes in industry are using gas to heat water to low temperatures. This can be done with electricity. But it's enormous. It requires enormous investments, and the industrial scaling of the wind industry, of solar, is very, very significant. In our studies, we've been saying that we may have to go even faster, go even further. The European Commission was foreseeing a overall electrification of the economy of 30% by 2030. The Eurelectric studies have shown that if we want to be in line with carbon neutrality by mid-century, we probably need to raise that up until somewhere between 32 and 36. Now, all this brings me to the point about energy security and the role of thermal plants in a net zero world. When we think of thermal plant, we often think of something that eventually needs to go because it has carbon emissions. What we need to think about in the short and medium term now is that the most safe pillar of dealing with our energy dependence is to stop using energy. The safest energy is the one we don't use. The cheapest energy is the one we don't use. The second best option is electrification. We need to massively electrify. Our cars will be dependent on electricity. Our heat pumps, our cooling systems will be dependent on electricity. Increasingly, our industry will be dependent on electricity. That means that more than ever, since we rely on electricity, our electricity system also needs to be reliable. And when is the electricity system reliable? That is when we can actually generate the amount of electricity we need at any given time. So we need very, very badly the thermal units in the near future and also in the medium term. And then we need to think about how we gradually shift the role, because as we saw from a presentation earlier today, the role of the plants will change. This is not this slide. But we had a colleague, I wrote his name down, who showed that right now, renewables are not impacting the system too much. Over time, they will gradually impact the system significantly and eventually dominate, and at some point overshoot the need for electricity in the system. That's how this will evolve, and the thermal units will evolve with them to support that role, support the decarbonization. That's the role of thermal units in an increasingly carbon-constrained world. But here and now, in the next 3 to 5 years, the thermal units we have, regardless of whether they're coal or gas, will be direly needed for security of supply because we're electrifying society. And we need to remember that and not be too hasty in changing things. The primary priorities for the industry should be to roll out renewables, deploy renewables wherever possible, reinforce the grids to transition to a more decentralized world where a lot of the renewables will be connected to the distribution grids, where the distribution grids need to handle the load from electric cars and heat pumps. Those are the industrial priorities, and the thermal units are there to back this process up. That's my vision, at least. And with those words, I would thank you very much for the attention and hand over the word to the next speaker, which is my colleague from Eurelectric.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ruby, for this general overview and sharing with us the perspective of European Union. We have seen that the energy security policies are hand in hand with the transition policies. The transition policies of EU still continue, maybe much stronger, more objective aimed, maybe. Now our second speaker is Mr. Christian Gruber, and he will talk about thermal power plants in the European Union Green Deal. And as this is a main discussion item within the European Green Deal policies, we will be happy to hear you regarding this issue. We will also appreciate if you could also introduce yourself. Thank you.
Definitely. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much again to us for hosting us, and honored to be here and to provide you a bit with an overview on how the Commission and Eurelectric are intending to implement these visions. And where do we stand and where we're planning to go, as a policy can be an instrumental tool to guide these visions, which will be addressed in the remit of the working group environmental protection and working group thermal and nuclear, which I have the honor to chair at the Eurelectric Secretariat. This is my current function, which I've been doing for 1 year, and I'm really looking forward to guide you through what I call the 5 pillars for thermal power plants. So I've included here different micro areas where thermal power plants will have to focus on in the coming decades, and how the current policy, the current European policy, is guiding them through this process. So one element which has been of very much prominence, and Christian has provided us a very good overview on what has been going on in terms of latest developments, is energy security. Then we'll also have a quick look at the enabled financial frameworks, the environmental standards, sustainable regional development, and last but not least, research and development, which is a huge contribution to to the decarbonization of the sector and of European economies in general. So all these trends are also very much intertwined by different trends and on a regional and on a global level. So very recently we had this push towards more electrification and addressing energy security through supply diversification in light of to reduce, with the aim to reduce the dependency on energy imports for most European countries. Then we also had previously some phases where we are trying to pick up the ambitions raised by the COP, by the international progress that has been made, also in light of the Paris Agreement, and also to address a fair and just energy transition, addressing societal and financial concerns. Despite the multiple advantages that coal generation and flexible fossil capacities provide, shifting from fossil fuels has been paramount for the achievement of many climate goals for many multiple European countries. And as we can see, that coal generation, according to our latest power barometer, is declining faster than previously expected. So a lot of European countries have decided to phase out coal capacities. By the end of 2040, we'll see a considerable number of phasing out coal capacities. However, there is the risk of delaying in light of the current energy security concerns. So we have seen that multiple governments, such as in Greece and Romania, are planning plant extensions, and countries such as Germany, Czech Republic, and Poland are revising energy strategies. So these are commitments that member states have made on a national level, but the European Union is trying to address these on a wider scale through this new and revised security of supply regulation. So to address the increasing dependence of Russian gas imports, the Commission has proposed this new regulation, which introduces a few key principles in order to establish the energy union that it foreseen just a few years ago. So it enshrines this solidarity principle, which will help member states to ensure mutually gas supplies to households and critical infrastructures. We have seen a shift from a national to regional approach, also encompassing the energy community countries, thus enabling a better coordination between member states. And we have also seen some additional transparency requirement for procurement contracts. So the Commission will be notified of any gas supply disruption in order to guarantee a system-wide security of supply. So to all of this to be sustained, it has to be viable from an economic perspective as well. So we have seen that for thermal power plants, there have been many public funds and programs developed by the European Union to promote the regional development and to promote the energy independence of multiple countries, of multiple member states. And we have also seen that the Commission is trying to implement some earmarking for climate action, under which thermal power plants also fall into through the use of sustainable fuels. So we have seen this in the long-term budget from 2021 to 2027, but also in national recovery and resilience plans, which are dedicated to to address the economic downturn of the COVID pandemic. Also related to this, there has been a fresh influx of cash through this aforementioned Repower EU plan, where we have seen quite a significant influx of investments of funds dedicated to not only photovoltaic and wind installations, but also energy efficiency, LNG infrastructure, and biomethane. So these investments will also need to comply with the strict due diligence requirement, which will be set by the EU taxonomy, which is the Commission is currently developing in order to guide private investment towards the right channels. For thermal activities, this falls in the remit of the Climate Delegated Act, which will be covering not only biomass but also natural gas and nuclear, at least for a transitionary period. Nevertheless, despite all of these funds, all of these opportunities, not only for public but also for private investments, we are seeing a big need for investments by 2045, as current annual investment in generation assets have not led us on the curve towards the achievement of the decarbonization target that we are setting ourselves. And this is also why not only the previously showed slide with the Repower EU investments are much more than welcome, but we also need to pick up on the on achieving a carbon neutral electricity mix. This is also enabled by environmental standards, which are being currently revised. So through the Industrial Emissions Directive, which regulates around 50,000 industrial installations all over Europe, and it enforces the application of best available techniques in order to mitigate the emissions of thermal installations. And as you can see from the chart, it achieved substantial results. So just to cite a few, we have seen a diminishing of sulfur dioxide emissions by 91% and of nitrogen oxide by 68% between the period going from 2004 to 2020. So these are also very valuable tools for promote the phase-in of alternative fuels, of biogas, and this is also something that the Repower EU, the previous communication, addresses in the biomethane charts, whereas it pushes for biogas and biomethane partnership between industries, incentives to upgrade towards biomethane for fossil fuel sources, research and development investments, and many more initiatives. So the retrofitting of the plants must also be accompanied by a reskilling and retraining of local communities, as we have seen that societal impacts of decarbonization plans must be accompanied by concrete programs that will effectively and inclusively enable the whole societies, whole countries to transition. So for this, we have three funds and mechanisms in place. The first one being the Just Transition, which mobilizes significant amounts of money, around 25 billion, to foster the reskilling and retraining programs of communities heavily dependent on the coal industry. Then we have also seen the establishment of this modernization fund, which through the revenues by the ETS will enable the development and adoption of less energy-intensive solutions across the 10 member states. And then, last but not least, we've also seen the Social Climate Fund, which provides immediate income to private households, which is something that we've also addressed in our recent study, E-Equality, where it looks at the need to provide households directly with mitigation tools for the redistributive effect of decarbonization policies. Then a last pillar, it's the decarbonization promoted by research and development. And one of our key items that we're looking at in the working group thermal and nuclear on this regard is the deployment of small modular reactors. So we have a great outlook for European countries as they have significant experience and expertise in the nuclear sector, and we have identified the following factors as crucial in order for the nuclear for the small modular reactors installations to pick up worldwide. So we could hit a potential demand of hundreds of units by 2040, with the Asia-Pacific region being the biggest buyer, but European countries would be closely second, and the technological edge would remain still in Europe. So these are the key conditions that I've listed, so from modularization and factory build to design simplification, standardization, and harmonization, as we believe that these have the potential to develop economies of scale that have already been proven in other industries. So if you look at the aviation sector with Airbus, but also in shipbuilding, so there is a more need for coordination to support the global development and the global outlook for small modular reactors. And we have seen quite a few initiatives also at European level with nuclear international organizations and the commissions on this, which we're quite happily participating in. I hope this helped you to gain a bit of an insight of what Eurelectric is currently looking at and where the Commission has set its targets for the achievement of not only the 2030 but also the 2050 targets for us to hopefully achieve the full decarbonization of the European economies. So. In order for this to become a reality, we shall support a technology-neutral approach so that we ensure equal conditions for all the sources of carbon-free electricity, which is something that is still in the remit of national government. So we have seen quite a few discussions on which solution is best catered to deliver based on the necessities and priorities. We also need to support the development of low carbon and renewable gases, as we have seen that the market availability is one of the crucial topics for these technologies to hopefully pick up. And we also need to support more vulnerable households and countries starting from a more difficult position in terms of their journey towards the energy transition and electrification. And yeah, last but not least, we also should support investments in generation capacities, and as previously mentioned, also on distribution grids, in order to have efficient resource allocations for everybody. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll remain at your disposal for any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gruber, for your valuable remarks. As the thermal power plants are very important within the perspective of energy security policies. In this regard, your presentation was very valuable, and we are facing with a huge investment need in this regard, and also it is important to put this issue also forward. And also, nuclear is one of the choices for climate change, to deal with the climate change challenges in this regard is also important. And now our next speaker is Dr. Jens Reich. He is the Director of Energy Technologies from STIC. And he will make his remarks on trends and technologies in power generation. Mr. Reich, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
And please kindly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the previous speakers for setting this political scheme. I'm an engineer. That means I will bring that a little bit to projects and to power generation and to power plants. As I mentioned, I'm within STEAG. I'm responsible for all non-nuclear engineering activities within STEAG. STEAG is an energy company with large power plants, with decentralized power plants, with district heating systems and industrial power plants. And we are active in Turkey since the 80s of the last century. Our starting point is within ERAS. As an example, commissioning of Elbistan B was one of our activities, and we are a developer of Zügüzü power plant and also 50% shareholder of ISKEN. That means we have a long-term relationship and also a certain interest on the developments in Turkey. I would like to repeat a little bit some topics the previous speaker mentioned, and then to go to coal-fired and gas-fired power plants and what are the effects on power plants. As you mentioned here, I talk about refurbishment of coal-fired plants, not about investment in coal-fired plants, which is in line of the political directives. But I definitely see, and there's also one topic to invest in gas-fired power plants, which is under EU taxonomy, green transition technology. And last but not least, I will give you also a short summary. From a company point of view, with its heart and origin in coal, it's definitely also our goal to decarbonize ourselves, to decarbonize industry. I think the importance was mentioned also in the speeches today in the morning, and there's no doubt to work on that. And also no doubt that we need to increase the renewable power generation, which is, and this is also, I think, quite important in the last months, also a way to be independent from energy imports. Renewable power is local, is regional, is national. That means from an energy security point of view, it's very, very important to increase investment in development in renewable power generation. But there's a drawback. Renewable power generation is mostly non-dispatchable. And it's seasonal, and there is daily fluctuations. Seasonal wind has a strong, is strongly affected by the seasons. Hydropower, and you know that in Turkey quite well, is a seasonal business depending on dam levels and rainfalls. And PV is the best example that we have daily fluctuations. These needs to be mentioned, and then I would totally agree to. I think it was the first question that thermal power generation should and must be a partner to enhance the increase of renewables. Then, energy security is a topic, and It's also mentioned, on the one hand, we need to supply our people, our industry, with power, with electricity, because that is the enabler of growth and prosperity. But we need to also look on costs of fuel supply and the security of supply. And I've been active a long time together with our office in Berlin, and we talked about energy supply, or security of energy supply. And we haven't been heard about a decade. Unfortunately, or it's a mess that now this terrible war brought that to the agenda. But that is also a situation which we are faced at the moment in Germany. And it is definitely a delay of, or will cause a delay of shutdown of coal-fired power plants. At the moment, the STEAG plants in Germany are running more or less full of their capacity. In the last 2 to 3 years, they run around 500 to 1,000 hours per year. This is the effect of high gas prices, fear of cutting off gas from Russia, and on the one hand, it's a business case for us because actually we are earning money with this coal power plants. That means for a certain time, it's not an interest of our company to shut them down. But there's also strong indications from the grid operators, from the regulator, that we will not be allowed to shut down power plants due to these reasons. And personally, we will have I'm the opinion we will have a delay of between 2 and 5 years for shutting down coal-fired power plants. But now, going more into technique and to power generation, and I would like to start with coal-fired power plants. We see 3 topics. On the one hand, optimization. That means we have assets with an investment we need to use best. And the best way to be partner is that all the power plants, especially the coal-fired power plants, are flexible. Flexibility means low minimum load, fast startup times, and high ramp speed. That means all the fluctuations which comes from renewable can be balanced by the thermal power plants. And that is the partnering and the contribution these power plants can bring to the grid. Furthermore, there are a lot of options, and we did that with a 90 megawatt battery in Germany. We have a perfect infrastructure to build storage devices, batteries on these plants. Everything is there. We have a grid connection, we have an electrical infrastructure. Mostly we have also space. Let's build storage plants to provide grid services for the grid operators. And last but not least, it's also about how to run and to operate coal-fired power plants. There are a lot of modern devices necessary, software, artificial intelligence to bring this mostly mentioned dinosaur technology into the 21st century. Second topic is topping, it's to use the infrastructure and the space to set up PV power plants, to set up solar thermal power plants. Actually, we will realize a project with the power plants. Doing that with PV or with solar, we projected it in the last years. There's also there might be an opportunity to gasify waste and biomass and to feed the off gas or the syngas to the boiler as to substitute fossil fuels. And on the long-term run, we need to think also about CCS and CCU. That means carbon capture, sequestration, and reuse. Last but not least, it's fuel change. One topic is natural gas, but in my view, it's quite inefficient to burn natural gas in a boiler or in a power plant with 40% efficiency when you have combined cycle power technology available with 60% plus. Then to substitute especially coal by waste and RDF, and there are a lot of experience in Germany, especially in the lignite power plants, where you have also a lot here in Turkey to substitute or co-combust waste and RDF, which on the one hand solves an environmental problem on the short-term run, and also to save fossil fuels. You can burn directly biomass, which is more on topic of logistics and availability. I think Gary can tell me a little bit more of the activities of RWE as an example in the UK. And on the long-term run, it's definitely also ammonia on the topic. Ammonia as hydrogen carrier, where maybe, in my view, starting of in the next decade, we can use ammonia with hydrogen from sun-rich regions to use it directly in thermal power plants. Coming now to gas, on the optimization side, it's more or less the same. The requirements coming from the grids, they are the same regardless if it's fired by coal or by gas. And it's also the same for topping. With the fuel change, we'll definitely need to look on hydrogen, which portion of hydrogen we can feed into a natural gas stream, which is suitable for the gas turbine which you have already installed. Ammonia, actually I don't see that on that agenda for gas turbines, not on the middle or short-term run, but on the long-term run we need definitely to observe that. For new builds, combined cycle power plants, it's definitely H2 readiness. That means talking with the OEM suppliers what level of H2 is suitable for the plant. Is it at the moment 30 or 30% or even more? To talk about retrofit kits for 100% H2 and concepts, that is definitely a topic we need to observe from, let me say, from the traditional engineering point of view. Then, when we talk about flexibility, and I show you just one example from a client in Germany who would like to invest into a gas-fired power plant, who has also the use of heat. And here we have two examples coming from Siemens. Where you have on the one hand a modular concept with smaller SGT-800 gas turbines, where we have three units with multi-shaft engines. Against that, one of the latest and largest H-class gas turbines, the SGT-5 9000 with a capacity of nearly 900 megawatt. And then you have to look what is the contribution or the requirement coming from the grid. Is it baseload to have capacity? It's definitely the single unit, the best one. Higher efficiency, smaller footprint, lower investment. But if you talk about flexibility, to be quite flexible also in low load situation, there this multiple gas turbine concept is in favor. Maybe it's not the actual time in Turkey to do that, but in Germany with around 40% renewables, we are at the time that we will get a shift from this big high efficiency projects to smaller ones, to more flexible and to more modular ones. Flexibility I've already mentioned. Also, the other points are quite important. This comes also from the path for refurbishment and optimization of plants. So, coming to summary, decarbonization is a common goal. I think there's no misunderstanding that it is on our agenda, and it will be on our agenda for the next decade, and we all need to work on that. And thermal power generation, it is a partner, and I think in the last months, the name partner or became another meaning. Because it stands for enabling renewable power supply, enabling of growth, enabling of prosperity. But it's not business as usual to say, okay, we are just the generators and providing baseload power. That is not the future. That means we need to rethink our mindset. We need to think on optimization, on refurbishment, on new ways on development of thermal power plants to be the partner of the renewables. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reich, for sharing with us the perspectives of stack, your experiences, and as intermittence of sources and baseload generations are two important issues. Thank you for this valuable presentation. Our last speaker is Mr. Gerhard Grip, the CEO of RWE Turkas Güney Elektrik Üretim AŞ. He will make his remarks on RWE Growing Green Experience. Please, Mr. Grip, and also please kindly introduce yourself.
Okay,
the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to this workshop. As the chairman said, my name is Gareth Cribb. I'm the CEO of RTG. RTG is RWE and Turkas Güney. We've been in commercial operation since 2013 in Turkey. The plant is based down in Denizli. It's an 800 megawatt CCGT. I actually work for a larger company, or it is part of a larger company, being the RWE German company, the parent company. And the business that we have, the RTG business that we have in Turkey, is a joint venture. So it's 70% RWE and 30% Turkas. Just going a bit towards my history and where I've come from. My main experience is in the UK. I've been in the industry a long, long time, longer than I can remember. But when I started back in the UK in 1985, it was a public industry. The main generation at that time was coal. We had nuclear power plants and oil for support. And in those years, in the 37 years I've been in the industry, it's changed incredible. And I think the target we're going for now to 2053, I think it's going to change incredibly again. With the emissions directives, regulations, with the carbon trading scheme, the UK generation model now, operating model, the coal stations, the RWE coal stations have shut down. We have no more coal stations in the UK. From a wider UK perspective, there is only 3 operational coal stations in the UK now, and they have a date to be shut by 2025. So the mix within the UK, the primary load or the primary capacity and generation capacity is CCGTs, followed by wind, solar, biomass, and hydro. So the market has completely changed from what I started with, as I say, a long, long time ago. Just on that perspective, there's even more challenging times for us in that sense. The UK government has also said and has started talking about from 2035 potentially ending natural gas firing as well. So that is something, you know, as a business that we have to look towards and look at plans for what we're going to do. So we need a decarbonisation route even for our gas turbines that we have in operation at the moment. So things are constantly changing, and that's one thing which we have faced in trying to operate the business. Just going on, and I think it was worth just mentioning, this presentation is about RWE and about the model that we're operating, and there may be synergies with the Turkish market to a certain extent. But RWE operating within Germany, I would say the basis of the business not that long ago was literally lignite mining, lignite power generation. It was nuclear. That was the core business, with CCGTs to offer the flexibility as well. That has remarkably changed through a number of reasons. Fukushima, the incident that happened over there, German government then decided that nuclear was no longer something they would support. And also now, with the German government has decided that the coal generation facilities will be closed down by a predefined date as well. So what we found as a business was that suddenly we had to transition. We either had a diminishing business or we would have to transition, and how would we do that? So it was quite a stark sort of position to be in as a business, with all these things facing us from a regulation point of view, and with also the climate change, which we had to take into account as well from a sustainability point of view. There was a number of factors affecting the business. So things have changed quite considerably. So what I'm just going to run through with this presentation is just what our objectives are as a business now, just to give you an idea of where our business is going. And as I say, from a thermal generation perspective, our main assets are in the UK. They're also in Germany and in the Netherlands. And also we have, as I say, the one CCGT in Turkey. So the wider part of our business is obviously heading for renewables, and I'll just go a bit more into that, where we're transitioning to. So as I say, this presentation is about, you know, the challenges that we're faced by a business, where we've come from, and where we're headed in terms of our long-term plan for sustainability, and to keep growing the business. So, in terms of clear objective, the aim of the company is to be climate neutral by 2040, and that is ahead of where, you know, that we're looking in terms of, we've been talking about 2050, but as a business, we are headed for 2040. That is the aim of the business. The figures that I've got on this chart here, as a checkpoint, we've got targets set for 2030 in terms of where we want to be. And those figures quoted on the slide are in million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So, as it was mentioned before, in the UK we closed our last hard coal UK power station literally in 2020. And as I said, there's only 3 left, 3 now overall coal power stations in the UK, and they have to be shut by 2025. One of the largest ones, Drax, half the units there are already converted to biomass, but their transition path I'm not too sure of there. Likewise, we've got dates set now for the lignite power generation within Germany. They've got a 2038 date in terms of being shut. And the Netherlands, as I say, that's 2030 in terms of closing the hard coal plants over there. We had built relatively new hard coal plants over there in Emer and Eemshaven, and they are transitioning now to fully biomass units. We're partially through that process, but we're transitioning them to be on fully biomass by this date. One of the other objectives that we're looking at with the biomass plant as well is looking at carbon capture. Some of the other presenters have talked about that, and that is one of our key objectives as well, is to try and look at carbon capture, because with the biomass plant being carbon neutral, if we can get carbon capture on there as well as a, I'll call it a portfolio plant, we can effectively become carbon negative, and that will help out with the rest of our fleet, shall I say, of assets. Not only looking at direct emissions coming from the stacks and the chimneys, we're also looking at our other emissions, and that can come from the fuels we burn, the electricity we trade, or even through procurement processes. We're also looking into how we can reduce that, and the way the targets are set out, the scientific measurements, as I say, it's not just the emission side of it, it's the other objectives of our business, that we want to try and reduce the carbon intensity of those other sectors as well. Okay. Right. So in terms of the transition, and this is just to give you a sort of brief outline of where we started from, and how the different sort of directives, trying to be a sustainable company, and the regulations have affected the business. So as you can see, going back to 2016, coal and nuclear side of our business was the biggest part of the business, basically. Since then, we've looked at how we can adapt the business, and these are the estimated figures of where we'll be in 2023. So we haven't completely shut down the coal and nuclear side of it, but over the last couple of years, 2020 we shut down 1 unit. In 2021 we shut down another 3 units of coal-fired generation. And this is part of a government programme, that there was an auction, there is government assistance, but we sort of bid into that auction to close down our lignite and coal units. So there is support within these European countries for doing that, and likewise on the nuclear side, because we had to shut down our nuclear power stations as well in Germany, that there was support from the government to be able to transition and do that as well. So they're quite ambitious targets, but we are effectively changing our business to a renewable company and trying to grow the earnings before interest, tax and depreciation as well, and amortization. So what we're increasing our portfolio in terms of onshore, offshore solar plants, and getting the income from those plants to replace the conventional generation, as in coal and nuclear. So by 2027, we should have increased our renewables portfolio to the size that it will accommodate the lost income, shall I say, from the other conventional generation. Right, so at the moment, as I say, we are still operating coal and nuclear stations. They are now not considered part of the core business. So our core business, as we see it at the moment, is the 5 areas that are highlighted on the slide. So we've got offshore wind, which, as I say, it's incredibly complex. And one thing to bear in mind when we talk about all these transitions is that when it comes to offshore wind and onshore wind, they take a long time to permit. So from conception, getting all the improvements, the agreements, through to getting the finance and then final construction and operation, offshore wind could take anywhere between 8 to 10 years to develop. And then when you come to onshore wind, you could be looking at 4 to 6 years. So we have to take all these timescales into account when we're looking at this transition process. So taking that into account, this is why we talk about, and I've heard it a number of times mentioned today, firm and flexible power supplies. So from a portfolio point of view and a core business point of view, we are concentrating on the existing gas fleet that we have, the CCGT fleet that we have. In terms of where we're going with that, we do also need a decarbonisation route for those existing assets we have. So for those CCGTs, we're also looking at decarbonisation in terms of on the flue gas and also alternative fuels. And I think we've already mentioned that previously. Hydrogen is a big option for us now going forward. As a company, as RW as a company, is putting a lot of time and investment into hydrogen and developing a hydrogen business. In terms of battery storage, that is another area. We also operate hydro plants. So along with the renewables, we're looking at putting in utility-sized batteries on our hydro plants to support the grid, support the systems. Within Germany, as I say, because they are closing down the coal-fired power stations and also the nuclears, they are concerned about security of supply. And one of the things that we have assisted I'll call it system operator with, we have won tenders to install new gas-fired generation open cycle, but they are directly dispatchable by the grid operator. We do not run them commercially in the market, but that's a specific worry that the German sort of grid operator has. Also, within the UK, we bid into the capacity system, and we're also installing smaller gas engines just to supply grid stability. I mentioned it previously, but the hydrogen side of our business, again, is growing very, very rapidly. We have now, within the generation side of the business, we have a director for hydrogen, and that is looking at opportunities, as I say, in our core markets across Netherlands, Germany, and the UK. So we have gone into and signed memorandums of understanding with various key industry leaders, leading companies such as Shell and also BASF, and working closely with the government in terms of specific projects within these areas, because I don't think hydrogen and the security supply and environmental considerations fall just purely on the generators. I think if we want to decarbonise, we have to look at all the sectors and work in conjunction, because when we talked about earlier, arc furnaces or other combustion processes, cement works, they are all going to have a similar problem to conventional generators. The generation plants. In terms of the last pillar of the core business, it's energy trading and customer solutions, and I've just mentioned a bit about the future market when it comes to decarbonising and hydrogen, but there's also that we will look that we trade across the world, and not only in renewables, offshore, onshore and solar. We've found we have a big market within America, Poland, Italy. Renewables seems to be taken off all over the world. We've even signed now I'll call it an agreement with Tata Holding for offshore wind within India. Everywhere is looking, the countries in terms of growing their renewable energy. In terms of what we think the market is going to look like, this is our view of the future energy market. As you can see, there's floating offshore, there's no standard offshore, and we think that there's going to be hydrogen being shipped around the world. And if it's not hydrogen, it could be ammonia as a carrier for hydrogen. Decarbonisation is going to be a key thing for industry as well, and it was mentioned in some of the previous presentations that electrifying or turning industry into electrification, and also household users, whether it be heat pumps or electric heating, but in the domestic user, I think they will go more down the route of electrification, so which means that we have to have the renewable energy to start with. As I mentioned before, the CCGTs as well, we do see them as the firm, flexible capacity and security supply for the future, but we also have to look at hydrogen burning within those generators. And if that's not the case, because technology is still developing in that area with hydrogen burn, so decarbonisation has to run in parallel to that. And is there a route to get that decarbonising the flue gases? That also needs to be a consideration. So that is RWE's view of future generation. When it comes down to I'll call this a summary rather than a conclusion and recommendation, but just to summarise, the future is clearly driving towards renewable technologies for energy production. Other sectors such as industry and transport need to be considered in conjunction with conventional generation for decarbonisation. I think it needs to be a joined-up effort rather than the generators on one hand, industry on another, and also local transport and transportation being a key area as well. Some form of firm, flexible generation will be required to provide system security, which we will need to be environmentally and socially acceptable. This could be conventional generation with carbon capture or alternative fuels, plus supported by hydro, batteries, biomass, nuclear, etc., which is one of the other areas which the UK is also looking into, new nuclear stations. And as I mentioned before, the hydrogen market is gathering pace, but it does need government support to drive that forward. and it still needs developing along with other technologies such as carbon capture. Out of all of this, with all these projects and the new investments, one of the key words which keeps being used is sustainability. And I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to get financing for projects unless that comes out in the forefront. And even when I've been looking at personal investments, they've asked me, do you want to invest in sustainable funds? And I think the banking loans and the investments, they will all be looking for that key word, sustainability. And I've finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krip, for sharing with us your policy perspectives. We have finalized with our presentations, and now we can begin our Q&A session. As we have extended the duration of today's whole program, maybe we can take a few questions from the audience. And I think the microphone will be... And please also kindly introduce yourself before you ask your question. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for all presentations. Thank you all participants. It was a great session. All presentations were useful and perfect for us. So my name is Sezer Aksoy. I work at EUH as a communication expert. And I would like to ask a question for Mr. Ruby. Because as I know, you work as a journalist and served 7 years, please correct me if I'm wrong, as a public servant in Danish Ministries of Environment. So I would like to ask you, do you have any advice for communication experts in Turkey to create a communication strategy for net zero literacy, and also how can we inspire to policymakers on this field? Thank you.
That's a good question. I didn't expect it. It's true. I was a journalist. I was working as a radio journalist for 5 years, and also did conduct public campaigns in the ministries. I would need to know a bit more about the perceptions of Turkish people towards this issue. But when I was in the European Commission, what we experienced was that there was a tendency to think about everything related to climate as something that would involve a loss for the individual, something which was about saving energy, not being able to eat the food you want, not being able to travel where you want to go. So we created a campaign called A World You Like, which was about showing that climate action is actually creating a world that's better than the one we have today. It's one that's more safe, it's one that is more innovative, one which is full of the food you want to eat, the nice clothes you want to have, and there was a fundamental, it was a very sort of popular campaign. We did fashion shows, for instance, with sustainable clothing. We did a big fashion show in Milan, and that was a way to communicate with people based on what you normally like to engage with. Your clothes, your hobbies, your traveling. So make it exciting and alive that way was working well at the time. For me, the next big campaigning issue that we need to engage on is energy savings. Somehow make energy savings flashy and exciting. I know that's going to be very difficult, but I see no other way. As I said, we will be facing a crunch in the energy supply. Remember, we're not at the end of something, we're at the beginning of a very, very difficult time, which will last for 3 to 5 years, is my assessment, where energy will be very expensive, which will help the energy savings, but where we also need to inspire people to do things in different ways, where they save energy, save their own money, and help them that way. So I think there's something very exciting and interesting for communication people to work with.
Okay, I'm Dr. Gökalp from Middle East Technical University. Thank you for the talks. Well, question to Gareth, but also perhaps Jens may answer, also comment. I guess, Gareth, you said at the end that the generators or gas turbines, combustors, were not yet ready for hydrogen. And perhaps you can comment also from the Sterk side.
Start?
Okay. In terms of our existing gas turbines, depending on they've all been constructed at different ages and different service packs, shall I say, particularly with Siemens. So depending on where they are in that process, they all have different types of burners within their gas turbines. So, for instance, if you look at, I think it's service pack 6, service pack 7 of the F-class gas turbines, they cannot burn 100% hydrogen. They're still in development from that side of it. They can burn up to a certain percentage, and I don't know whether there's any, I'll call it industrial gas turbines in operation at the moment burning a certain percentage of hydrogen, but my belief with standard burners, you can only go up to between 15 to 25% hydrogen in natural gas. They may be higher now with service pack 7, I'm not too sure, but they can't go fully 100% at the moment unless they're specifically designed. So retrofitting of existing gas turbines is going to be a very big challenge and very costly from that perspective.
Yeah. I would like to add on, all of the large gas turbine suppliers, they have a program to get 100% hydrogen gas turbines until 2030, roughly. Which then comprises the entire portfolio of gas turbines. That means also the F and the H class and so on and so forth. That means Siemens and also others like GE, Ansaldo, Mitsubishi, or not only to focus on this company from Germany, they are working on that. But we will see first smaller gas turbines, industrial scale. S800 is an example. Kawasaki has a smaller one. There are solar turbines as a manufacturer where the turbine can build a high portion of hydrogen. But at the moment you can't buy an H-class, F-class gas turbine in a big industrial scale 100% for hydrogen. It's under development. On the other hand, I think we need also to be fair. You won't get also the hydrogen to supply these plants. That means we need to build up on the one hand, start the renewable generation to produce the hydrogen, then the hydrogen, and also the equipment to use it.
Maybe if I can add just a perspective on this, which is hydrogen is definitely an integral part of the strategy, also in Europe. But I think we need to look at hydrogen, especially in the next 3 to 5 years, through the lens of energy scarcity. We need to ask ourselves, where will the hydrogen come from? And essentially there are two ways of producing it, as I can see it. There is the methane way, where we strip methane of its carbon, and there is electrolysis, and you can use different types of generation in relation to electrolysis. But we need to remember that we're going to be short of electricity, and we're going to be short of gas. So losing another 40% of the energy in a conversion process and then burning it with another loss, I think will be a very, very difficult choice to make in the next 5 years, where I expect energy to be very scarce. So this may be a solution for the longer term, but in the short term, this will probably be difficult.
Yeah, I would like to add, and I totally agree. I don't see hydrogen in power generation not before 2040, 2050, when we have a surplus of hydrogen. We have there's a very valuable fuel which we can use for transport, which is needed by the chemical industry to transfer their processes, and then at the end we will burn it. And that makes only make sense when we have a surplus.
Thank you.
Cost expectation about Excuse me. Even though it is not so important because of the supply security is more important, and at the moment we need hydrogen to generate power. But what about the cost comparison between natural gas and hydrogen, and what's your expectation? Even though it is in 2030, there must be an expectation for the pre-calculations. Thank you.
I can't comment on that. I do not have any figures off the top of my head on that, so I can't comment on that. But I know that we within the company, we have looked at those calculations because we are actually doing pilot projects now with 100 megawatt electrolyzers, and we're going forward with sort of commissioning those and looking at small scale projects. So they have done some costings, but I can't say off the top of my head what those are.
To give you some rough figures, if we're talking with steel industry, they would like to have hydrogen for around €2 per kilogram, but at the moment you can't produce it for 2. You can get it from via the natural gas source, but pure renewable, that means green hydrogen, you can produce, I don't know, for 5 and 6 euro per kilogram. That means there's a gap. And therefore, that is also one part of funding initiatives in the EU or in the member states to get a bridge that means that these pilot plants will be economically viable. On the other hand, we see off-takers in the transportation area in Germany who can pay 6 to 7 euros per kilogram. That means there will also be kind of a competition who is paying the most for the hydrogen. I think at the moment, to compare it with natural gas, it will definitely be not economical.
Kristen, you told we need renewable power to produce hydrogen. Why it is so necessary to have? Why not you don't use ordinary power sources to produce hydrogen? Instead, you are looking for new alternatives to generate hydrogen with renewable power sources. So you are going to burn hydrogen in gas turbine. So why don't you use from a gas turbine manufacturer? So what's wrong with that?
Well, if we look at the emissions profile of hydrogen that has been produced from, say, coal electricity or gas electricity, the emission profile will be very high because we lost 40% of the energy in the process of producing it. In Eurelectric, we are, however, quite pragmatic in the sense we say we should definitely use nuclear power to produce hydrogen. We should definitely use hydropower to produce hydrogen. These are baseload technologies. That means the electrolyzer can run all the time. It's not stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. So the economics of that are quite good. And we also say that we should be pragmatic when assessing what is actually clean hydrogen. Imagine a system like the French, for instance, that has 75% nuclear and a little bit of gas. It does make sense in such a country actually to just plug the electrolyzer onto the grid, because you will still have a fairly clean hydrogen product. What we also say is you should, of course, be transparent about what that is, you know, that it is not renewable necessarily, but it is low-carbon hydrogen. And my last point would be, again, the hydrogen will be very, very valuable. We are facing now a crunch on fertilizers because of the war in Ukraine, unfortunately. And that will become worse. And if you have hydrogen, there will be a strong incentive to use that hydrogen for ammonia production, for instance, for the fertilizer.
Thank you. I think with that we have. Okay, we can take last question, and thank you. Yes.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you on behalf of EUH and also my name. This is Gülcan Koca. I work for EUH, Thermal Power Plant Department. For Euroelectric, I would like to ask for directly to you, because Germany doesn't support the SMR and nuclear. Last year, as a thermal and nuclear working group, last year we published a SMR book. We focus on SMR. What is the technology? What is the SMR? So, I would like to ask you directly, Christine and Ruby and Gruber, sorry. What is your role of Euroelectric for development of the SMR? And for instance, how can we perform joint study together with TESAP or EUH together with Euroelectric? Okay, thank you.
Well, maybe I can say just a very short comment on the prospect for MSR. I think it's really a technology that some countries need to double down on and make decisions about. All nuclear technologies require a big ecosystem, a continuous effort to develop the necessary competence, an ability to handle the risky parts of the supply chain and so on and so forth. So it requires states to make decisions. We want to do this. That's what this will take. And as you know, we are active on this, and we have some specific policy recommendations. But Christian, you're better at explaining exactly how we see those issues.
Yeah, so SMRs is one of the flagship initiatives within our working group. So it's definitely something that we're closely monitoring, and we have noticed a lot of activities. Also, not only within our memberships with members such as EOS and TESAP, but as well with the institutional players. So we're closely cooperating with different international organizations dedicated to the development of common standards and harmonizing the regulatory framework for SMRs. So we have gladly appreciated your publication as well. We also developed one a few years ago. And we're also trying to, through events and through advocacy, to spread out the benefits of this technology, not only for picking up generation capacity, but also for the heat, for hydrogen generation as well. So it definitely presents a lot of opportunities, and it will be very interesting also to collaborate with EOS on this dimension in the coming months and years.
Thank you. Now we came to the end of our session. We thank all of our valuable speakers for joining us today, and also EUH for making this happen for us. Thank you very much.
Oturum Başkanımıza ve konuşmacılarımıza çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Efendim sizleri bir süre daha sahnede ağırlayacağız. Bir hatıra fotoğrafı çektirmek için.
Yes.
I think we're doing a photo or something. You stand in the middle.
Yeah. Come on in the middle.
So you look like.
Panelistlerimiz fotoğraf çekilirken ben de şu duyuruyu yapmış olayım. Şimdi 15 dakikalık kısa bir ara veriyoruz. Çalıştayımız Termik Santrallerde Karbon Azaltımı isimli 3. oturumla